Thank you for attending today's live product demonstration titled Applying Lean Practices to Portfolio Management to Create Visibility Across the Digital Enterprise. My name is Alexandra Garrett, and I am the Director of Product Marketing here at CollabNet version 1. Lonnie Hare is one of our solution architects who will be leading our live demo today. In this session, you will learn how enterprises apply lean practices to portfolio management to gain visibility into how delivery can be aligned with business objectives. For questions during the demonstration, please type them into the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. We will either answer the questions as they are asked or collect some of the questions to be addressed at the end of the demo. There will also be time at the end of the session for open Q&A. I will now turn the discussion over to Lonnie, and we will get started with the live product demonstration. Welcome, Lonnie.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. As mentioned, my name is Lonnie Hare. I am a solution architect here at CollabNet. And today, we're going to take a look at the demonstration around lean portfolio practices and how version 1 can help manage that. So I've got up here just a quick kind of context setter. So our solution provides value stream management across the entire business. Today, what we're going to focus on primarily is here in the upper left corner. So as we talk about this, we're going to talk about this from strategy down to epics, and then we'll be cutting off there. There are going to be some additional webinars that will cover some of the other aspects and capabilities. So with that in mind, that's where we're going to start. So as mentioned, if you have any questions, do just type them in and we will get to those. I think today a good approach would be to kind of start with a little bit of modeling. So I'm going to focus on portfolios as described by the Scout Agile framework. A couple of reasons. There's a lot of content that I can refer you to if you have any questions about anything that we've discussed today. It's well documented on the Scout Agile site, and our support for Scout Agile framework, in addition to other models, is available as well. So this is just one approach, and as we talk through this, I'll be referring to things like strategic themes, lean budgets, epics enablers, portfolio Kanbans, etc. To get started, there are a few things that we do need to kind of keep in mind as we're talking about a portfolio. There's a number of aspects that we need to consider as we're kind of going through this exercise and what it means to manage a portfolio. So starting with some of the roles, right? Some of the roles that we tend to talk about are epic owners, enterprise architects, and a lean portfolio management team. They're trying to manage a few different aspects. A couple of things to highlight would be things like value streams, portfolio Kanbans. So we'll touch on all of those concepts in a moment. What we're looking at right now is the portfolio backlog, which consists of all of the assets that the portfolio is attempting to prioritize and gain alignment on across the entire organization. Understanding what it is we're trying to deliver is kind of the idea behind the portfolio backlog. As we think about how do we communicate to the organization, there are some inputs that are coming in from the enterprise. So assuming that an enterprise has a single portfolio, there may be pretty close alignment. But if we have large organizations that may be supporting multiple portfolios, then that alignment can have some complexity associated to that. Generally speaking, what that means is that the portfolios themselves will be taking guidance. Their guardrails are going to come in the form of strategic themes. Portfolios themselves will define their own strategic themes. Strategic themes will become a way to support decision-making around things like budgets, around things like scheduling, and prioritization. So if we take a look at innovation, just as an example, we get a pretty good sense for what this strategic theme is meant to support. And as we look at what the rest of the backlog is contributing to the strategic theme, we get a good idea all the way down to the user story level how the organization is aligned to that. So there's a lot of good alignment here based on this diagram, and I can drill down into specific epics if I need to and capabilities to understand additional details about that. Strategic themes are going to, again, help us to understand how we schedule items in terms of how we prioritize them. One of those ways will be through the roadmap views. Roadmaps are a way to kind of help create a vision for the organization. Version 1 supports that through any number of configurations. So here's a quarterly roadmap. We can certainly support kind of longer term road mapping. So if we have a 3-year roadmap, we can design that. The details associated with this are being driven from the portfolio backlog. So as we identify the things that the portfolio is going to fund and deliver against, those items will fall into a bucket here on the roadmap, depending on how we have it described. And in addition, we can overlay our strategic themes to help us gain a quick understanding of how we're allocating and aligning these portfolio items from the backlog to the strategic themes. Right, so if we're focused primarily on portfolios, then all the portfolio items here are going to be described as epics. Those epics will have a number of Agile release trains that are going to execute against them. They're going to elaborate against these epics to create things like enablers, capabilities, features. Ultimately, they're going to describe user stories that are going to roll up and help to provide the feedback that is the other part of the Lean Agile portfolio tenets. So what does this mean for a portfolio? So this is about kind of understanding where work is, how it's aligning to the vision, and how we can start to set a stage for the plan that we're going to execute against and ultimately understand feedback for. So let's go back to the backlog. As we look at the backlog, it's a great place to look at a prioritized backlog. In context of everything else that we've looked at, understanding priority is kind of top down. So things at the top are the most important. As we move down, they become less important. And in this case, we can see that we're making progress on the top 3 items, and we have at least started elaboration on the top 6. So we're starting to get into kind of the estimations. We may be getting into some scheduling things that we'll take a look at in just a moment. But this is starting to give us a big picture of how the organization is aligning to these activities that we have described here. An important aspect of this prioritization is to have some form of economic prioritization. So again, the Scaled Agile framework has some recommendations. Part of that includes defining or calculating a weighted shortest job first to help make some decisions around that priority. And pulling these into the different stages or phases of the organizational process we'll take a look at in the Kanban in just a moment. But this gives us kind of a starting point for understanding what it is that we're going to do and what the priority is of those items are, again, to communicate and align the rest of the organization to the execution of these. Let's just open up Cloud Call Center as an example. So looking at Cloud Call Center, we can see that the organization or the Agile release trains fundamentally have broken this down into 3 capabilities and 4 features. There's some feedback from production support through the use of defects. And as we expand the capabilities, they'll break down into smaller items, in this case features, ultimately down into the user stories. Again, this was depicted in one of the visualizations that we saw for the innovation strategic theme, but this just is in a list view. right? If we can prioritize these in an economic fashion, then this exercise can happen in real time as we are pivoting, as we start getting feedback on the delivery. So I've created a delivery insights view. So for the portfolio, what's going to be important, in addition to creating a vision and coordination for the rest of the organization to align to that vision, is to kind of track and understand the feedback. So one of the feedbacks that a lot of organizations have gotten really good at is to understand progress. Progress is defined by the completion of user stories by teams. So as we complete work, we kind of understand progress in that sense. If we're integrated into our delivery pipelines, we can start to get a sense for how much of an epic has been delivered into production versus how much is waiting to be delivered or how much is still in development. So in this case, we can see 15 items have been delivered into production, 16 is waiting in inventory, and 31 items are still in development. This additional insights will help to drive how we're going to pivot, right? In addition, things to like Net Promoter Score or any kind of surveys that you may have, or any metrics that you may have on the features that are being deployed, that's going to help drive a lot of that decision making. So this is just one example of how we can leverage the data that is being produced from our DevOps pipeline, and ensuring that we have insights into essentially how much of the work is actually been delivered versus how much has been planned to be delivered. Right, so looking at the portfolio Kanban, the Kanban is going to help organizations take a lean approach to managing their portfolio, to describe their process, and introduce lean concepts like work and process limits. Again, work and process limits are a way for the organization to manage their demand and capacity at a high level. So as we exceed our work and process limits, we get visibility into that. We can start to make some decisions about either does this mean we need to pull item forward into the next stage, or does it mean that we need to pull something back out into the previous stage. But again, a lot of this is around making sure that the organization is managing to their capacity and ensuring alignment across the value streams that they're managing. So in this example, helping those value streams coordinate the work in terms of scheduling is another aspect. So we can see what scheduling looks like from the roadmap as well. So previously, we looked at the roadmap in context of the quarters we think we will have delivery of these epics in, and their alignment to the strategic themes. We can toggle this layout view to give us a more scheduled view. So now that we can kind of understand, based on a calendar as the backdrop, the prioritized work is going to be executed in this timeline. Again, expanding Cloud Call Center gives us insights into the lower level plannings and kind of, in this particular case, what release milestones certain features are going to be targeting. And if we had a situation where schedules didn't allow for a feature to be delivered until after the expected completion date of the epic, then the organization, again, has feedback in understanding whether or not capacity allows them to deliver this on time, if they need to increase their organizational throughput, or if they need to delay delivery of, in this case, Cloud Call Center Release 1.0. I've mentioned budgets a couple of times. Budgets is another kind of alignment and scheduling exercise. So if we take a look at that, I've got a couple of examples here. So one is by strategic theme. So how are we allocating and aligning our efforts to the strategic themes? We looked at innovation earlier. As we look at innovation again, we can see that we have good coverage in terms of alignment to the innovation strategic theme, and we have some capacity to take on some additional work, as opposed to here in core improvements where we have allocated 15% to the budget, and we have some over allocation here. So what this would mean is that the organization would need to kind of focus more on prioritizing the right things in core improvements versus being able to deliver on everything in innovations.
Lonnie?
Yes.
We have a couple questions that have come in.
Sure.
So the first one is, when you move an epic, will all stories of that epic move as well?
So the short answer is yes, for scheduling into different value streams or different program increments. So what I mean by that is for the program level, so we're talking about portfolios at the program level, when we are moving features and epics around between program increments and between teams, then all the user stories and defects that are associated to it will move with that assignment. In terms of just prioritizing them and moving them around on the roadmap, the answer is no. So we don't adjust the timing of things or the prioritization of things because a change in priority has occurred. And what I mean by that is, if something in here at the top has moved down, we won't automatically move the stories down in their respective backlogs at the team level. This will just be a leading indicator to those teams that this effort has been deprioritized and they need to realign to the new prioritization. So hopefully that helps. If it doesn't, please re-ask the question or some clarifying questions. Were there more?
And the next question is, what is swag?
Swag, excellent question. So swag is the attribute that contains the estimate for version 1 portfolio items. Let me just go back here and make that visible. So swag is just the estimate that is being provided at the portfolio item level, either the epics or the features. So it's an estimation, it's a numerical estimation for a version 1 portfolio item.
Okay, and the last questions right now, and then we'll move on to the demo, is can you please explain where the prioritization data, such as time, critically, cost of delay is coming from? Are they calculated by the system or entered by users?
Excellent question. So getting back to the economic prioritization, the values, time criticality, risk reduction, and business value are all being entered in by the lean portfolio management team. So we'll have representatives from the business, we'll have architectural and marketing input, and these numbers are being input from those different groups. The calculated values are going to be the cost of delay and the way to shortest job first. Those are going to be calculated based on the inputs from these three and the swag.
Okay, we can move on with the rest of the demo and we'll answer other questions at the end.
Excellent, excellent. And while we're here, just to keep in mind, everything that I'm talking about is documented out on the Scott Agile Framework site. So if you come in here and click on any of these icons, they'll take you to the details and it should describe any of the things that I'm covering today. Or if I don't cover something that you find interesting and want to learn more about, you can also find that here as well. Excellent. So we've talked about kind of creating the vision. We've talked about prioritization. We've talked about alignment, a few different tools that we can use inside of version 1 to support all of those activities. Another activity is coordination. Coordination across value streams, again, making an assumption that we have a large enough organization where there is more than a one-to-one relationship. Then we may have a situation where a portfolio has multiple value streams that they are supporting. And when that's the case, a a market advantage could be the way that you're able to coordinate across these different value streams and release trains. In this case, I've got it done on a monthly column base, so I can see month over month how do I need to kind of coordinate between these. We can also do this by iterations and sprints if we need to, but what this does is it gives us an opportunity to engage with those teams that are doing the actual execution, to help them remove impediments, to help engage in any kind of enablement that needs to occur across these value streams, and to ensure that there is continued alignment between the value streams and the portfolio. So this board, the value stream board, takes that and looks at it from a dependency perspective. So what are the things that could potentially delay delivery of the epics that we are trying to manage at the portfolio? So if I hover over earthquake effects, I can see that a system train has a item that could delay delivery of the epic that has been planned by the Agile release train. And what this does, it gives me a platform for collaboration between those two parts of the organization to help resolve any impediments that could potentially delay delivery of that item, or to help provide support to remove any of those impediments that could delay delivery. I think the last thing really to cover at this point is all of these different capabilities, all of these different views, and all of these different techniques are going to be part of the transformation or part of the lean practices that are being adopted by the organization. The responsibility of managing the Center of Excellence for the organization falls on the lean portfolio management team as well. So version 1 does provide support for communities of practice. And if we have a Lean Agile Center of Excellence within the organization, then there is an opportunity to start to describe the practices that the organization is adopting, to define things like different levels of the portfolio, and additionally help to drive some of the governance and standard practices and adoption across all of the teams that are supporting and delivering against the portfolio items. So with this, that allows us to start to deliver this content directly into the teams. So as I mentioned, for organizations, large organizations, they may have multiple portfolios. So we can create different portfolio rooms that will contain a lot of the details that are required in one place. These are the information radiators that we went through through the demonstration, but here we can kind of set up some configurations. In this case, these are all of my epics. If I, as a portfolio team, wanted to also help remove impediments at the feature level, then I can pull in a feature Kanban and help my value streams manage to that. I have access to analytic reporting and scorecards. So these are going to help me with some of the decision support to understand kind of the performance of my portfolio. So in this case, if I move down here, one of the easiest things to kind of understand is, okay, how many teams do I have engaged in the portfolio? In this case, 4. And what is their contribution to that backlog? So the largest percent of it is here in the website team. And all of their work is new story development. The other 2, the platform team and the core app team, have roughly the same amount, but the core app team has a much higher defect density. So again, engaging to remove impediments that could be causing this team any heartache is an opportunity here to engage with that particular team on. And along with any of these reports that may help to kind of understand and manage the flow of value through your system. So these are all the steps that we have defined on our portfolio Kanban. And the cumulative flow helps me to understand how I'm managing my work in process limits. In this case, it's showing me that I have a relatively thin work in process limits as it's moving through the system. So we're doing a pretty good job of that. Whenever we see it swell and spike, like right here in analysis, this is where we would see kind of that the WIP being exceeded. And when that happens, that could be an impact to the flow of the work. Excuse me. That could be an impact to the flow of work that this portfolio is managing to. So I guess at the end of the day, the lean portfolio is shifting kind of their responsibilities and how they engage with the rest of the organization. I guess to mention more traditional approaches would say kind of top-down decision-making. This approach for lean, agile portfolios is to decentralize some of that decision-making, especially around kind of the content authority. And when I say content authority, I mean the items that are in the backlog, what the priorities of those things should be, and when teams should engage and execute against those. That's a decentralized set of activities. What is still centralized are the things like strategic themes and alignment and creation of that vision for the organization to align to. Those are centralized functions that the lean portfolio management team is directly responsible for. So let's pause there. We're approaching kind of the bottom of the half hour. See if there's any additional questions. Otherwise, I'll start wrapping things up.
So there is a question. It is, can you apply these techniques to a waterfall type project with longer milestones?
The short answer is yes. There will be some paradigm shift in terms of how we visualize data in version 1, but we are helping organizations transition from traditional practices to a more lean agile approach. And it is something that we can support and model inside of version 1.
Are there any other questions on the chat? Or we can open it up to, or we can have you move on with your demo.
Yep.
Looks good to move on.
Very good. So in summary, let's take a look at all of the things that we covered. Again, thinking about what it is that we are talking about, it's this layer here, lean portfolio management. Some of the techniques and tenets that are associated with it are going to be described in the context that I've demonstrated here on the Scaled Agile Framework website. We've covered lean budgets, at least in one aspect. We talked about kind of the percentage. I can also showcase how we can do that from a currency standpoint. I did not cover portfolio canvases, but I can. I'd also talked about strategic themes. The different roles will simply engage in any of those views that are going to help drive some of the decision making for the lean portfolio management team. And we covered the backlog and the Kanban approach. So just to kind of go back and kind of round things out, looking at budgets. So we looked at a percentage where we said, 50% of the work should align to the innovation. In this case, let's do a value stream funding effort. So in this case, I've got euros. So I've got 1.1 million euros budgeted for this value stream. I've got it allocated to the two different groups that the two different value streams that are supported by this portfolio. And in this example, I can see that the product group has some capacity remaining. As we look at this, there's an opportunity to be be able to deliver additional work, but we're currently managing to fiscal responsibility. As we exceed the budget for that, it will help to drive, again, some decision making about what is in scope and what is out of scope, and how rigorous we need to be in terms of leveraging weighted assurance job first and the reprioritization of our backlog in real time. The other thing that I mentioned or didn't mention was the Lean Canvas. Lean Canvases are available to be used across any part of the organization, but SAFE kind of focuses primarily on the portfolio canvas. So here is my portfolio definition. It's where I hold a lot of the assumptions and some of the driving decisions that are going to be part of this particular portfolio. And I've integrated with a third-party tool to host my Lean Canvas, but we can also, link to any PDFs or any other tool that you may be using and integrate to that. In this case, we're using a third-party solution called Real-Time Boards, and this is how we can help to communicate and communicate the vision and create the alignment to the rest of the organization. All right, and with that, that concludes all of the things that I had planned for the demonstration today. Again, covering all of the Lean portfolio management capabilities and how version 1 specifically would support those. At this point, I would like to open the floor to any additional questions that you may have.
So one has come in. I would like to know if there's a view to see the complete value stream or steps of a solution.
Repeat that one more time. If there's a view for.
Is there a view to see the complete value stream of a solution?
The complete value stream of a solution. So that is going to be yes. That's going to be done primarily here in the portfolio Kanban. Again, the Kanban will describe all of the steps that we are trying to measure. Mine happens to end at deployment, so we can include any additional steps here that are going to give you visibility into that.
Great. And if you have any other questions, please enter them now in the right-hand corner of your screen in the questions section. Another question has come in. Can you please explain how you determine you have excess capacity at one of the teams? Do you forecast workload based on story size or expected sprint? And do you include all stories or certain priorities?
All good questions. I will point out that that is not a responsibility of the Lean portfolio management team. It is something that version 1 does support. Let me first answer the question from a portfolio perspective in terms of capacity. From a Lean portfolio perspective, capacity is going to be based on throughput, and we describe that throughput in a view at the bottom of the roadmap. So I'll focus primarily on swag, which again is the estimate at the portfolio item level. So all of the epics that are displayed will have an estimate associated with that under the swag. So here we can see that historically we have been able to increase throughput about every month, and then 2 months out it looks like we stair step up again. So as we look at this is going to help us kind of understand, are we trending in an upward direction? Are we delivering flat, or what is our capacity in that perspective? So if we see a huge bump, so I'll switch this to estimate. Right. In this case, we are elaborating in real time, so we're not going too far out in terms of how we're estimating, but we can see that this is a much higher number here. If we saw this in the future bump up, then that would give us an indication that we have scheduling conflicts in terms of scope that we need to kind of level out organizationally. For your particular question, you're asking about kind of team and capacity and allocation around that. That is a function of the program, and what we can do there is we can set targets for the teams that are going to execute. In this case, in the program increments, we set targets for the organization to plan to, in this case, 150 points. And we've allocated 143. When the teams engaged, we had 150 points targeted, but they've over allocated by almost 60 points. So there's an over allocation here in the next level of planning. So this is the first level of understanding of our over allocation once the teams have engaged. The next level is to look at the teams themselves. Each team will commit to a particular velocity, in this case, 5 points per week for the core app team, and we'll calculate their capacity to take on work based on the duration of the PI. So the number of weeks multiplied by 5 will give us the capacity for the team, and we'll be able to know that on a team-by-team basis. So in this case, we can see that all of our teams are not over-allocated, but in this example, it's because I have a new team, the mobile app team, that is rolling onto the Agile release train, taking on that additional work that is showing as over-allocated at the PI level. So hopefully that helps to answer some of those questions. Again, if not, let me know and I'll elaborate further.
There's a question about the difference between swag and story points.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
What is the difference?
So let me just go back to the portfolio tree. That's going to primarily depend on your, excuse me, estimation practices. What I mean by that is there are some recommendations by SAFe on how that should look. So I'll just go up to the portfolio again. Give me just a moment. So I can expand out and show you the difference, right? So the cloud call center is estimated at a 4. And if we look at the other epics, they're 1, 2s, etc. So in this example, I'm using relative estimation, very similar to story points and how we kind of relatively estimate between story points. So my baseline is a 2, then my 1s are half the size, and my 3s or 4s are bigger than that. So that's what I'm using at the epic level. You'll notice, however, when I get down into the feature level, that number changes. So there's a recommendation. One approach is to estimate it based on what you think the total number of story points is required to deliver that. In this case, 10 points. And when the teams engage, they've estimated at 6. So this is our plan versus actuals. And where this becomes valuable is when we see something like this. We originally thought it was 8 points. The team engaged and said it was 40 points. Let's try to understand what the discrepancy is here and resolve that. So again, hopefully that helps to answer the question, but do feel free to have me clarify.
The next question is, do you perform capacity analysis at epic level, or would you do them at story level? Is it worth the complexity?
Do we do capacity analysis at the epic level or the story level? I would say in context of the question, all of our capacity is based on story level estimates because it is the closest estimation to the teams, and teams in version 1 are the resource that we are managing capacity for. So if I understood the question correctly, the response would be primarily at the story level is how we calculate it. At the feature level, where that would add value is if you had featured teams. Where that could pose complexity is if you have any other team alignment, like component teams versus feature teams.
Sorry, I'm reading the questions. There's a lot of them.
Sure. No problem at all.
Okay, the next one is, story points can vary among teams. How do you manage that?
Yes, story points can vary among teams. Again, SAFe has a a concept around story point normalization. At the end of the day, version 1 accepts numerical values in terms of calculating. I think most teams today that are adopting estimation practices vary widely in what they score as a 2 versus a 3. So version 1 doesn't directly address that disparity or variance between the different teams, which is why when we talked about the increment planning, we have the teams commit to their velocity so that we can focus on ensuring that we are not over allocating at the team level. So as planning is occurring, we are appropriately matching the demand to the team's estimations, right? Again, in my example, this is a fairly straightforward thing because I have a fictional company that has feature teams. So teams are aligning to specific features, and all the stories in that feature are being estimated by the team. So there's an alignment across those estimation practices. So when we get into this exercise, I can pull an entire feature in from the backlog and drop it directly onto a team. And the expectation is that, you know, a 1 means a 1 for that team, and that at a micro level that we're making the right decisions for allocation. On a macro level, that's why I said we tend to look at organizational throughput, and that's more about trends than it is about actual capacity. And that's why we're looking primarily for this chart down below here to give us an indication when we are overlapping. And let me move some of these around so we can kind of see that in real time. Right, as I'm scheduling items, when I have overlaps that increase the demand in the future, this is going to be an indicator that I need to reschedule to level this out to something more manageable, or it's an indicator that I need to start staffing up for this particular event. Hopefully that helps.
Great. The next question, Lonnie, is, can you comment generally on implementing the large solution configuration of SAFe, for example, epics at portfolio, solution, program, and team level?
Sure, no problem at all. So just kind of going back, right? The diagram has been simplified again. So 4.6, I believe, is where we're at. We're back to kind of a 3-tiered. Those different configurations can be selected, right? So the way that we would support that in version 1 is the planning level helps us describe the way that we are organizing aligned to SAFe. Let's look at a different view. So for the enterprise, I have a smaller implementation of Essential SAFe, which is essentially a release train that is managing PIs. I have a couple of portfolios, right? One value stream with multiple arts, multiple value streams, in this case, a single art, right? So I've got a few different configurations, and essentially this is where we would define the different SAFe configurations. So we would just insert large solution where appropriate. And as we go down through here, the PIs are where the teams will engage and execute against in a version 1 setup. I'm not sure if I missed part of the question, but this is generally speaking how we would configure version 1 to support SAFe and any of the configurations that SAFe has presented. This is also how we would be able to support multiple models. So we do have customers that are using SAFe in one part of the organization and large scale Scrum or Scrum at scale in another part of the organization. And we would just reflect that in the configuration that we have here.
next question is, what do the numbers on the left side of the SWAG view represent?
Give me just a moment to get back there. So I'm not exactly sure which view you're talking about. So in this view, these numbers represent the story point estimations in aggregate. So it's just rolling up all the estimates at the story level. I apologize if you can kind of point me to the view that you're referring to, then I can try to get there and explain that.
Okay, yeah, so while we wait for that clarification, let's move on to another. Let's move on to another question.
Sure.
So the story points estimation for one team can be equal to other teams. For example, 100 SP or story points. 100 story points equals 150 story points in two different teams.
Got it. Okay.
Is that correct?
That is correct, and that's part of the autonomy of teams. So if you don't have normalized story points, then you'll have situations like that where one team for a PI has estimated all the work that they can do to be 100 points, and another team says they can do 150 points. Right? That just means that the team stated velocity is slightly different. That probably means that the team that estimated at 100 points is estimating larger items in the backlog. So if you looked at their cycle times, my guess is that you would see that that particular team works on a story a little bit longer than the other team. So they're able to complete stories a little bit quicker because they are smaller. They're chunking out their stories in smaller slices. That just indicates to me kind of the level of maturity and estimation practices. So if you have a team, for example, that's used to sprinting on a 30-day sprint versus a team that's used to creating user stories to sprint on a 2-week cycle, right? Those are estimation practices that teams will normalize on their own. And especially across the organizations, you're going to have some variance between what an estimate is across teams, unless you have a practice in place that normalizes those story points in some fashion. One example of a normalized story point estimation would be to move from story points to ideal days. So coming from an extreme program background, our estimates were in ideal days, and that was a way to normalize estimation across teams.
Great, thanks so much, Lonnie. So we are going to answer one more question and then wrap it up. If we did not get to your questions today, don't worry, we will be responding or replying to you after the call. And so the clarification on the last question was, I'll repeat the question and then the clarification. The question was, what do the numbers on the left side of the SWAG view represent? And the clarification was the graph at the bottom of the planning view.
Oh, got it. So here, and then down at the bottom here, when I just look at SWAG, what do these numbers over here to the left mean? Is that correct? So these numbers here represent the throughput the organization would need to deliver on over the period of time. So in this example, it would be 0.5 point per week delivery in order to deliver everything that's planned in this time frame, right? So as we move forward, this means that we're pushing up to 0.75 point, and up here we're pushing up to just over 1 point a week. So that's what these numbers are. It's essentially an average throughput for the organizational delivery.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lonnie, for the great demonstration and for fielding the questions. I want to thank all of our attendees for your questions, attendance, and your interest in CollabNet version 1. And one more thing I wanted to mention before we close is that CollabNet version 1 works with companies who are at all stages of implementing either their scaling agile or DevOps initiatives or SAFe initiatives. And we offer coaching services for those who may need additional training to be successful with your initiative. We also provide product training for all CollabNet version 1 solutions to help our customers accelerate software delivery across their value streams. So please let us know if you're interested in learning more, and we'll be more than happy to follow up with you directly. Have a great day, everyone.